It began with a whisper. A rumor passed around the cramped rehearsal room of a high school in Tarlac, Philippines. "We might be going to America." The words hung in the air like incense in a quiet chapel, unbelievable yet too sacred to dismiss. The San Lorenzo Youth Choir, a group of students and young adults who had never left their province, let alone the country, had just been invited to perform a Christmas carol at a centuries-old cathedral in New York City. At first, they thought it was a mistake, a cruel joke, or maybe a scam. But the invitation was real, and so were the tears that followed. These were not just students. They were children of farmers, street vendors, janitors. Music was their escape, their prayer, their hope. And now it was becoming their passport to the world. The invitation came from St. Augustine's Cathedral, a Gothic landmark in Manhattan that had stood tall through wars, pandemics, and centuries of American history. Every year, the cathedral held a Christmas vigil so hauntingly beautiful, it was known to draw thousands. But this year, the organizers wanted something different. Something that would remind people of resilience. Someone from the choir had posted a video of their open-air Christmas performance in the town plaza the year before. Shaky camera, scratchy audio, but the harmony was pure magic. That video, almost forgotten by the time it gained traction, had made its way into the inbox of the cathedral's musical director. That's how the impossible invitation was born. And now, a group of small-town singers would be preparing to sing for a global audience, without the money, the passports, or even winter clothes. Rehearsals intensified. Morning, afternoon, night. Their small church, where most of them had learned to sing, became a second home. No more half-hearted notes. No more giggling through warm-ups. Each practice was a battleground between doubt and determination. Some days, their voices cracked from exhaustion. Some days, the power went out mid-rehearsal, and they would continue singing in the dark. Their conductor, Ma'am Sally, a retired music teacher with arthritis and a spirit like fire, pushed them harder than ever before. She believed this was not just a trip, it was a mission. "We carry the voice of the Filipino spirit," she reminded them. "We're not just going to sing, we're going to move souls." Each carol became more than a song. "Oh Holy Night" wasn't just about a silent night in Bethlehem anymore. It became a cry of faith from a people who had known poverty, typhoons, and unbreakable hope. But the road to New York was not paved with melodies. It was covered in obstacles. First, the choir needed passports. For many of them, the application fee alone was a burden their families couldn't afford. Ma'am Sally launched a fundraising drive, selling native delicacies, organizing benefit concerts, even standing at intersections with donation boxes. One viral Facebook post from a local journalist captured their story, and donations started trickling in from overseas Filipinos. Still, it wasn't enough. 2 members quietly bowed out, not wanting to hold the group back with their financial struggles. The rest soldiered on. When the visa interviews came, the nerves were unbearable. What if they were denied? What if this dream crumbled before they could even board a plane? But one by one, they returned from Manila with the golden stamp in their passports. The impossible was slowly turning into reality. As the departure date approached, excitement mingled with fear. For some, it was their first time riding an airplane. Others had never even left their province. Parents wept while packing their children's clothes. Most borrowed, some hand-me-downs. The local government pitched in for jackets. The community rallied around them like it was their own children heading to battle. When the day came, the entire town showed up at the airport, waving small flags and handmade signs. There were tears, cheers, and whispered prayers. The choir members held hands tightly as the plane took off, the reality of their journey finally setting in. They were not just representing their school or town, they were representing the Philippines. Somewhere high above the clouds, they sang softly to calm their nerves. A hymn, a promise, a prayer whispered between friends. The sky heard them first. New York greeted them with snow, their first time seeing it. They laughed like children, tossing snowballs outside the airport while strangers looked on, bemused by the joy of a group of Filipinos discovering winter. But the cold cut deeper than expected. Their borrowed jackets were no match for Manhattan wind. Yet they smiled through it. A local Filipino church offered them temporary shelter. The cathedral's musical director, a stern man named Michael Reeds, met them the next day. He had heard their recordings but was skeptical. "Let's hear you live," he said. What followed was silence, and then a harmony so pure it filled the vaulted ceiling with warmth. For a moment, the cold didn't matter. Michael removed his glasses and blinked hard. "You'll do," he said. But what he didn't say, what he couldn't, was that they had just changed him. The days leading to Christmas were a blur of rehearsals, fittings, and last-minute changes. The choir trained in the cathedral itself, its massive organ and stone arches amplifying their every breath. Singing there felt like praying in a sacred tomb. Michael pushed them to refine their diction, their dynamics, their timing. But what he couldn't teach, and what he came to admire, was the soul in their voices. They didn't just sing. They felt. They believed. And the cathedral, in all its grandeur, began to echo with something ancient and raw. The voice of a people who had sung through hardship, colonization, migration, and miracles. Behind the scenes, some members nursed homesickness. Others broke down from exhaustion. But every time they sang, everything else disappeared. The music lifted them. It lifted everyone. Then came the night. Christmas Eve. The cathedral overflowed with people from all walks of life. Diplomats, artists, immigrants, skeptics, believers. Candles lit the corners. Breath curled in the cold air. The choir stood behind the altar, trembling in their modest robes. Ma'am Sally sat in the pews, clasping her hands, whispering prayers. The first note rose, then another. Then the full harmony, shaped in Tagalog and English, filled the ancient space. They sang not just "O Holy Night" but "Pasko na naman," "Ang Pasko ay Sumapit," and a spine-chilling rendition of "Silent Night" with verses in Ilocano. When they finished, the cathedral was silent, not out of politeness, but reverence. And then the applause. Thunderous, endless. Some were crying. Others stood with hands over their hearts. That night, they didn't just perform. They testified. The Filipino soul had arrived. What happened next was beyond anyone's expectations. A video of their performance, captured by an audience member and uploaded within hours, exploded online. Millions watched. Comments flooded in from Filipinos in Dubai, nurses in Canada, OFWs in Hong Kong. "I haven't heard my language sung in a cathedral before," wrote one. "I cried the whole time." Mainstream American media picked it up. They called it the Christmas Miracle Choir. Invitations poured in. Churches, schools, even the United Nations requested appearances. But for the choir, the greatest reward came not from fame, but from the feeling they carried inside, that their voices had transcended borders. They had sung not just for applause, but for healing. And they had reminded the world of something ancient and powerful, that music is prayer. And Filipino music, in all its joy and sorrow, was something the world needed to hear. Back in the Philippines, their return was a homecoming like no other. The entire town came out again, this time not to say goodbye, but to celebrate. There were tarpaulins, streamers, even a marching band. But the choir members had changed. They had walked through cathedrals of stone and cities of snow, but they had never forgotten where they came from. They returned not as celebrities, but as messengers. They went school to school, church to church, sharing what they had learned, helping other choirs, mentoring children. And every time they sang, the echoes of that New York cathedral still clung to their voices. The journey had been long. The price had been high, but the legacy was eternal. Because they had proven something undeniable, that the Filipino voice, rooted in faith, shaped by culture, forged through struggle, could move the world to tears. Weeks after their return, the ripple of their performance continued to travel across continents. Choir directors from Europe requested copies of their arrangements. Filipino communities abroad began organizing their own caroling groups, inspired by the choir's story. Even schools in the Philippines began including more native language songs in their Christmas programs. But for the members of the San Lorenzo Youth Choir, The most unexpected transformation was internal. Michael Reeds, the New York musical director who once doubted them, flew to the Philippines for a surprise visit. He brought with him not only recordings from their performance, now archived in the Cathedral's music library, but also news. The Cathedral wanted to establish an annual exchange program, offering Filipino choirs the chance to perform internationally. Their story, once a miracle, was now becoming a bridge. Back in their small rehearsal space in Tarlac, Ma'am Selly gathered her choir for a private meeting. She was proud, immeasurably proud, but she had news of her own. "This will be my last year," she told them, her voice calm but heavy. The room fell silent. She had given decades of her life to music education, sacrificing comfort, recognition, and even her health. Now, she was passing the baton, but she wanted her final year to mean something more. She proposed a concert series titled Himaging Bayan, a tribute to Filipino culture, featuring not only carols but regional folk songs, kundiman, and modern compositions in native dialects. The choir would perform in public schools, remote barangays, and even detention centers, places where music rarely reached. It wasn't just about performing anymore. It was about giving back. As the Himaging Bayan series began, the choir encountered realities far removed from cathedral halls. They sang in classrooms with broken windows, in gymnasiums with no microphones, in fields under the sun. They met children who had never seen a choir, never heard a harmony. In one mountain barangay, after a haunting rendition of Bayan Ko, an elderly woman approached them with tears in her eyes. "I haven't heard that song in 50 years, she whispered. "You reminded me of who I am." In that moment, the choir realized something profound. The power of their voices didn't depend on the venue, or even the audience. It lived in the stories they told, and in the identity they carried. They weren't just performers. They were keepers of memory. Meanwhile, the video of their cathedral performance continued to grow. It was translated into multiple languages. Reaction videos from American pastors, Italian vocal coaches, and K-pop idols began to surface. One popular comment, pinned on the viral upload, read, "You don't need to understand their language to understand their hearts." And that's exactly what made the choir's story resonate. They sang in a language many in the audience couldn't speak, but the emotions broke through every barrier. People weren't just crying because of nostalgia or beauty. They were crying because they saw something true. A moment of grace in a chaotic world. A reminder that music, at its purest, reveals the soul of a people. The Department of Education in the Philippines took notice. Invitations came in for the choir to perform at national events, educational forums, even diplomatic occasions. They were asked to sing at the Malacanang Palace during a cultural diplomacy program. But amid the honors, Ma'am Selly kept the choir grounded. "We don't sing for cameras. We sing for causes," she said. She reminded them that the foundation of their voice was not applause, but authenticity. Even as they stood before presidents and foreign dignitaries, the choir kept returning to where it all began, the dusty chapel in their hometown. That became their sacred space, their roots. It was there they recharged, relearned, and remembered why they began this journey in the first place. For the younger members of the choir, the experience unlocked dreams they never dared to speak aloud. One of them, Isko, a boy whose father was a tricycle driver, began applying for music scholarships abroad. Another, Leanne, who had once sung quietly in the back row, began composing original songs in Kapampangan and Tagalog, later performed by school choirs across Luzon. These weren't just kids anymore. They were artists, changemakers, storytellers. The choir had become more than a musical group. It had become a launchpad for futures no one had imagined possible. And yet, none of them left without first mentoring the next generation. "Leave a trail," Ma'am Selly always said, "so others can follow." Not all moments were triumphant. There were disappointments, too. A major sponsor pulled out before a scheduled Southeast Asia tour, leaving the choir devastated. Illness struck one of their sopranos, forcing her into recovery during what would have been a career-defining concert. And in one emotional gathering, a member broke down, confessing how hard it was to balance the fame and the expectations with family pressure to pursue a more stable career. But through it all, The choir leaned on one another. They prayed together, ate together, cried together. Their harmony extended beyond music. It was the bond between them, forged through storms, struggle, and song, that kept them whole. News outlets began framing their story as a modern parable, a tale of grit, grace, and glory. But behind the headlines, the choir remained deeply human. They still practiced under electric fans that barely worked. They still held rehearsals during brownouts, using candles to see their sheet music. They still carried the weight of representing an entire country, and they did it with humility. One rainy afternoon, while waiting for their jeepney to arrive after a local outreach, a little boy tugged at Isko's sleeve. "Kuya," he said, "can you teach me to sing like that?" Isko smiled, knelt down, and said, "Of course. You just have to believe your voice matters." As the years passed, the choir evolved. Members graduated, new ones joined, but the mission remained unchanged. In time, Ma'am Selly officially retired, her final concert drawing thousands. There wasn't a dry eye in the hall when she took her last bow. She handed the choir to two of her former students, now trained music educators themselves, who promised to uphold everything she had taught. Under their leadership, the choir expanded its reach to Mindanao and Visayas, even collaborating with indigenous communities to learn and preserve ancestral chants. The music became richer, the purpose deeper. The seed Ma'am Sally planted had become a tree, and it was bearing fruit across the archipelago. One Christmas, exactly 5 years after the New York performance, the choir was once again invited back to St. Augustine's Cathedral. This time they weren't unknowns. They were the main act. The cathedral had changed, and so had they. But when they stood in that same spot, beneath the same towering arches, they felt the same trembling in their chests. Not fear, reverence, gratitude. They sang with the wisdom of time, the scars of growth, and the power of identity. As the final note rang out, the crowd rose, just as before. But this time, the applause carried history. A story had come full circle, and somewhere in the rafters of that great American cathedral, the soul of a small Filipino town could still be heard, echoing in every harmony. The second performance in New York was captured by a professional film crew and aired during a global Christmas special. But something different happened this time. The choir requested that their segment begin not with their singing, but with a short narration about where they came from. It showed dusty roads, rice paddies, the humble church they rehearsed in. Then it faded into footage of them walking into the cathedral, quiet and dignified. The world saw not just performers, but pilgrims, travelers of faith and purpose. The contrast struck a chord with millions. "They brought heaven down," said one viewer. But the choir knew what they truly brought was the Philippines, its language, its struggles, its hope. They weren't there to shine alone. They were there to shine a light on every Filipino who had ever been told their dreams were too small. In the following months, the choir's story became part of educational curriculums in music and values education. Documentaries were made. Scholarships were offered to underprivileged music students across the country, many sponsored anonymously by viewers abroad who had seen the viral video and felt compelled to help. One businessman from Boston sent a letter saying, "I've never cried watching a choir before. You reminded me what art is supposed to do." The Filipino government formally recognized the choir with a presidential medal for cultural service. But even during the awards ceremony, the choir's representative, now a confident young leader named Leanne, asked for the platform to make a plea: support all our artists, not just us. Because every barangay has a voice waiting to be heard. The community that raised them continued to feel the ripples of their journey. Tarlac became a place of pilgrimage for musicians and students who wanted to see where it all began. Tourism grew, yes, but more importantly, investment in local arts programs followed. Music classrooms were built. Old instruments were replaced. Children who had once been shy to sing began joining school choirs. What the San Lorenzo Youth Choir had done was ignite a movement. They had taken the narrow path of music and widened it for thousands. And through it all, they remained present. They taught, volunteered, and reminded the next generation that every song, no matter how small, has a place in the world. A few years later, tragedy struck. Typhoon Daliang devastated their province, destroying homes, schools, and the very church where the choir first sang. For a moment, it felt like the music had stopped. The town was drowned in mud and grief. Some choir members lost everything. Others were forced to relocate. But in the midst of the chaos, a single act reignited hope. The remaining choir members gathered at the ruins of the chapel, walls broken, ceiling gone, and began to sing. No microphones, no cameras, just raw, trembling voices rising above the rubble. A passerby filmed it. The clip, barely 2 minutes long, showed them singing "Lead Me, Lord" through tears. The video went viral once again, not because of perfection, but because of its purity. In that moment, the world saw the unbreakable spirit of a people who had turned sorrow into song. Aid poured in, this time not from politicians or corporations, but from everyday people. Filipinos abroad organized fundraising concerts. American schools sent instruments. A retired architect in Canada volunteered to design a new music hall for free. In less than a year, the new San Lorenzo Cultural Center rose from the ruins, larger, more resilient, and dedicated to the voices that refused to be silenced. Its inauguration was marked by a grand concert, not just by the choir, but also by folk dancers, indigenous chanters, and local student musicians. It was more than a celebration. It was a declaration that from ruin could rise resonance, that the Filipino voice, rooted in faith and forged in fire, could rebuild what the storm tried to tack. As their reputation spread, the choir received an unexpected invitation from an unlikely place, a small town in Tennessee, USA. A Baptist church there had been deeply moved by the original Cathedral video and wanted to host the choir for a joint Christmas concert. At first, the invitation seemed unusual. It wasn't a grand cathedral. It wasn't even a Catholic church. But Ma'am Selly, though retired, urged them to go. "This is the meaning of our music," she said, "to connect beyond walls." So they went. And there, in a humble wooden chapel surrounded by forests, they sang beside a Southern gospel choir. Together, they performed a bilingual medley of Christmas hymns, ending with "Angels We Have Heard on High" and "Angels We Have Heard Ese Kalangitan." The accents were different. The traditions too. But the harmony was perfect. It was a glimpse of what unity could sound like. That Tennessee concert sparked a new chapter for the choir. They began collaborating internationally with African American spiritual ensembles, Latin American folk groups, and Asian student choirs. Each collaboration was treated as a cultural exchange, not just a performance. They learned to sing Zulu and Hebrew songs. In return, they taught their counterparts Parezo, Sa Yugoy Ing Duyen, and Tagumpay Nading Laha. The goal was never to show off. It was to listen, learn, and lift others up. In one letter from a student in Chile, the writer said, "Your music made me proud to be who I am. I didn't understand your words, but I understood your courage." And that became their new mission, to inspire identity through harmo. But amid all the travel and attention, the choir never stopped returning to their roots. Every Christmas, no matter where in the world they had been, they always came home. Their December concert in Tarlac became a beloved tradition, part caroling, part community outreach. They gave away food packs, performed at hospitals, and visited the elderly. For them, Christmas had never been about glitter or grandeur. It was about presence, about being where you're needed most. And every time they gathered in their old chapel, now rebuilt but still familiar, they sang the same song they sang on their first night abroad, "Oh Holy Night." It had become their anthem, their blessing, their reminder that holy nights are not just in cathedrals, but in every heart that chooses to age. The story of the San Lorenzo Youth Choir was eventually turned into a feature film, produced by an international studio but written and cast entirely by Filipinos. The movie received critical acclaim, but what mattered more to the choir was what happened afterward. In the weeks following the premiere, local choirs reported record signups. Parents who had once discouraged their children from pursuing music now began buying secondhand instruments. Even government officials began to take cultural development more seriously. Art, it seemed, was no longer just entertainment. It was empowerment. And the San Lorenzo Youth Choir, once a small-town group of dreamers, had helped a nation remember that. And yet, for all the grandeur their journey had taken on, the choir members would often say their favorite memory wasn't singing in front of thousands. It was that night in the snow, right after landing in New York for the first time. Cold, scared, overwhelmed, they had huddled together in a circle near the terminal. They had looked at one another, laughed nervously, and then one of them had started singing. One by one, the others joined. No audience, no conductor, just voices, raw and unfiltered, rising into the winter night. That moment, when they were still unknown, uncertain, and afraid, had been the purest. Because it wasn't about performance. It was about faith. And in that circle of song, under falling snow, the world first began to change. Years passed, and the world changed again. The pandemic came like a thief in the night, silencing auditoriums, closing borders, and forcing choirs around the world into stillness. For the San Lorenzo Youth Choir, it was the first time in nearly a decade that they couldn't gather for Christmas. The silence was deafening. No rehearsals, no travel, no singing side by side. But where others paused, they adapted. Using donated smartphones and patchy internet connections, they began virtual rehearsals, recording their parts in bedrooms, backyards, even kitchens. Then, on Christmas Eve, they released a digital concert, Tiniging Pag-asa, a montage of their isolated voices stitched together like a tapestry. The final video was raw, imperfect, and utterly human. It went viral in hours. Commenters wrote that it felt like angels had broken quarantine. In isolation, their harmony reached further than ever before, into hospital wards, lonely homes, and grieving hearts. The pandemic performance changed how people saw music. In a world gasping for comfort, the choir offered breath. Filipino nurses in New York streamed it on their phones between shifts. A mother in Milan said her daughter, who hadn't smiled in weeks, began singing along. But the greatest impact was local. Their video inspired dozens of community choirs across the Philippines to create their own virtual concerts, not for fame, but for healing. Music teachers who had nearly given up began again. Retired choir directors dusted off their batons. Even families began singing together in small home performances. The San Lorenzo Youth Choir had unintentionally sparked a new wave of musical resilience. Even when people couldn't be together, they could still harmonize. When the world finally reopened, the first thing the choir did was not travel abroad. It was to return to the mountains. They visited remote barangays that had been isolated for years, bringing with them food, instruments, and above all, music. They sang under trees, in makeshift tents on truck beds. No stage, no spotlight, just their voices. One night, while singing in a storm-damaged town, the power cut out mid-performance. The crowd held up their phones and flashlights, illuminating the choir as they sang a cappella. The image of light surrounding song was captured by a local photographer and published around the world. It became a symbol of recovery, of remembrance, of rising again. The choir had become more than performers. They had become carriers of light. Among the new choir members was a girl named Joy, the daughter of one of the original sopranos. She had grown up watching videos of the Cathedral performance, memorizing every harmony. Joining the choir had been her dream, not for fame, but to feel what her mother once felt, that moment when a voice becomes more than sound. Her debut performance was at the very place her mother had first sung publicly, the rebuilt San Lorenzo Chapel. There, surrounded by both old and new members, she sang the same song, "O Holy Night." Her mother watched from the crowd, eyes full of tears. It was a generational echo, the past whispering into the present. And as Joy's voice rose, it was clear that the music hadn't ended. It had just found nuance. The international world hadn't forgotten them either. One winter, an invitation came from the Vatican. A Filipino cardinal, now serving in Rome, had remembered their story and requested their presence for the Christmas Massachusetts. It was a moment that felt biblical. The choir who had once prayed under candlelight now standing inside St. Peter's Basilica. And yet, they didn't change who they were. They wore native weaves under their formal robes. They sang not only Latin hymns, but also a hauntingly beautiful version of Himiging Pasko in 4 Philippine dialects. The Pope himself remarked on their performance afterward, saying, "They did not sing to impress. They sang to witness." For the choir, it was never about grandeur. It was about truth. And in that moment, they sang the truth of a people who had survived storm after storm and still had songs to give. Their performance in Rome opened new doors, not of fame, but of purpose. They were invited to cultural diplomacy events, sharing their journey with policy leaders and artists alike. But they always insisted on bringing attention back to their roots. At one panel discussion in Geneva, their conductor shared, "What you see now is not the story of luck, but of labor, of mothers who sold kakanin so their children could sing, of teachers who gave their last years to build choirs, of voices raised in darkness until the world finally listened." Every word silenced the room. The audience stood in ovation, not for a choir, but for a country whose songs were often forgotten, but now remembered through harmony. Back home, the movement grew stronger. The San Lorenzo Youth Choir helped establish Himiging Bayan, a national network of youth choirs aimed at preserving Filipino musical heritage. Each region had its own group, trained in both technical skill and cultural depth. Every year, they gathered in Tarlac for a national choir summit, a convergence of dialects, styles, and stories. From the Ifugao Highlands to the shores of Mindoro, voices rose in unity. It was more than music. It was a revolution of identity, a reclaiming of pride. And in every circle, in every workshop, the San Lorenzo members taught the same principle: your voice is your truth. Don't be afraid to use it. The choir's legacy eventually reached books, murals, even postage stamps. But for the original members, the true legacy lived in the people. In the child who joined a choir because they saw someone who looked like them sing in a cathedral. In the elderly man who, after decades of silence, joined his local church choir again. In the teacher who finally convinced her school to fund a music program because, look what it did for them. These were the quiet echoes, the ones the world wouldn't see on stage, but the choir knew by heart. And for them, those echoes were the loudest proof of impact. Because music that changes a crowd is powerful, but music that changes a life, that's eternal. One day in the distant future, a reunion was held. The original members, now adults with their own careers and families, gathered back at the chapel where it all began. Some had become teachers, others musicians, one a priest, another a doctor. But when they entered that space, they were teenagers again, nervous, laughing, full of wonder. They stood in a circle, as they had so many years ago, and sang one last time together. The harmony came easily, muscle memory powered by love. Outside, a new generation watched through the windows awed. It was a passing of torches, a chorus of gratitude. And as the final note faded, so did the years between them. Time had passed, but the song had not. That evening, as stars emerged above the chapel, Mamseli, now frail, seated quietly in the front pew, was asked what she felt. She looked out at her former students, at the children of those students, at the building rebuilt through grace, and she said, "This is what I always dreamed of. Not fame, not applause, but that long after we're gone, our voices will still rise. That somewhere, someone will remember how we sang in the dark, and they'll sing too." And in that quiet, sacred moment, everyone understood what had really been built. Not just a choir, not just a legacy, but a living, breathing symphony of faith, talent, and culture, Filipino at heart and universal in soul. In the years that followed, the San Lorenzo Youth Choir was no longer just a choir, it was an institution. Its alumni formed outreach groups, mentoring rural choirs and organizing festivals celebrating traditional Filipino music. Every member, past or present, carried with them not only their voice, but their responsibility. They had become custodians of culture. In small barangays where art had once felt unreachable, children now sang with pride. They learned lullabies their grandparents once hummed, sang anthems in their own dialects. One small choir from a fishing town in Sorsogon, trained by a San Lorenzo alumnus, won an international contest in Singapore. Their performance? A Visayan folk medley. That victory wasn't just theirs. It was another note in a growing harmony that began years ago, in a forgotten room, with a group that dared to dream beyond borders. As the impact grew, so did the recognition. Cultural historians began referring to the San Lorenzo movement as a golden thread in Filipino modern history, a grassroots renaissance powered not by institutions, but by individuals who remembered who they were. Schools in the United States, Japan, and the Middle East began integrating Filipino choral music into their multicultural programs. Sheet music of San Lorenzo arrangements were published globally, with annotations about their origin and cultural context. In each page was a story, not just of notes and rhythm, but of people. Of teenagers who overcame poverty, of communities that rebuilt with harmony, of a people whose voices echoed long after the applause faded. The world wasn't just listening to Filipino music anymore, it was beginning to understand it. One of the most poignant moments came when an elderly American woman wrote a letter addressed simply to the Filipino choir. In shaky handwriting, she explained that she had lost her husband on Christmas Eve years ago and had stopped celebrating the season since. But then she came across the video of the San Lorenzo performance at the Cathedral. It didn't make the grief disappear, she wrote, but it reminded me that light still exists in the world. She ended with, "Thank you for lending your light to a stranger." The letter was read aloud during one of the choir's rehearsals. The room went silent. There were no cheers, just tears. In that moment, they realized that for all the awards and ovations, it was this, the quiet healing of one heart, that made their journey worth it. Even government policies began to shift. Seeing the widespread influence of music on national pride, the Department of Education launched a new initiative, Boses ang Bayan. Music education, once neglected, was now considered essential. Funding increased. Choir programs multiplied. And in every classroom where a child timidly found their first note, the spirit of San Lorenzo was there. Not in banners, not in speeches, but in the courage to sing. That was the gift the choir had left their country. Not just music, but belief. Belief that even the smallest voice, when raised with honesty, could echo across mountains and oceans. And belief that art, when born of truth, becomes unstoppable. Through all this, the original members aged. Some moved abroad. Others became parents. But no matter how far life took them, December always brought them back. If not physically, then through messages, video calls, and reunions in song. One year, for the choir's 20th anniversary, all living alumni were invited back to perform one grand concert. Hundreds returned. They filled the new cultural center and sang together in a chorus that spanned generations. Parents who had once cried at airports now cried in the audience. Teachers who had once scraped together budget for uniforms now sat honored on stage. It was more than nostalgia. It was proof, living, breathing proof, that music endures, and that from the voices of children could rise the hope of a nation. The concert was live-streamed across the globe. Watch parties sprang up in OFW communities from Riyadh to Toronto. Social media flooded with clips, memories, and stories. "I used to be in a choir," one user wrote. "This made me remember why I loved it." Another said, "My daughter joined a youth choir because of them. She says it makes her feel seen." And that was perhaps the most remarkable part, the way the choir's journey transcended music and became identity. They hadn't just given the world Filipino harmonies. They had given the world a window into the Filipino heart, resilient, radiant, and full of grace. Even after decades, the original New York performance remained sacred. St. Augustine's Cathedral, now with a plaque commemorating that Christmas Eve, often replayed the recording during Advent. Tourists who visited the church were told of a choir from a faraway land that had once brought heaven close enough to touch. But perhaps the greatest tribute came quietly. Every Christmas since, the cathedral added a Filipino carol to its program. And every time it played, those in the pews listened a little closer, as if searching for the voices that had first taught them what it meant to sing from the soul. what it meant to believe again. A final chapter began to unfold when Leanne, the once-shy soprano turned composer, was asked to write an original piece for a global peace summit. She titled it A Witting Mundo, Song of the World. It was performed by a choir of 50 nations, but it began in Tagalog. That first verse, simple, clear, deeply Filipino, echoed through the auditorium like a quiet wave. When it ended, the room didn't erupt into applause. It paused, held, revered. The song, born of a small town, had circled the world and come back home, not in sound, but in silence, the kind that only follows something holy. In that silence was reverence, and in that reverence the story lived on. The San Lorenzo Youth Choir never disbanded. It evolved. It taught. It remembered. In time, a museum wing was opened in their hometown's cultural center, displaying the original robe worn at the Cathedral, handwritten music sheets, passport photos, and a looping video of their first viral performance. Visitors came from everywhere. Choirs left notes on the walls. Children traced their fingers along the displays, dreaming their own harmonies. And among the items was a handwritten quote from Manselli, "The world is full of noise. Be the song." It was a simple phrase, but it held within it a lifetime of love, labor, and legacy. That message, quiet, unassuming, had become the anthem of a movement. And so, the story of a choir that began in a small Philippine town did not end in applause. It did not fade when the lights dimmed. It continued, in classrooms, in cathedrals, in corners of the world where someone still dares to sing. Because their journey wasn't about perfection or performance. It was about possibility, about how far a voice can travel when it carries the truth of its people, and about what happens when a group of young dreamers believes, against all odds, that their sound matters. They were not just a choir. They were a prayer, carried across oceans. A song that still echoes, in every note sung with faith, in every harmony born of hope. The Filipino voice, once whispered, now resounds. As time moved on, the impact of the choir began showing up in ways even they hadn't foreseen. University thesis papers were written on their cultural contributions. A respected ethnomusicologist from Germany conducted a full study on how their arrangements preserved endangered Philippine dialects. In Batons, an entire curriculum unit was designed around their story, encouraging students to create songs based on their own family histories. It wasn't just about music anymore. It was about memory, about reclaiming what colonization, modernization, and neglect had tried to erase. The San Lorenzo Youth Choir had become a movement not just of the voice, but of identity. And in every classroom where students sang local songs with pride, their harmony lived on, gentle, steady, and deeply rooted in who they were. One year, a choir from South Korea visited Tarlac as part of an international choral exchange. They had learned 3 Filipino songs, one in Tagalog, one in Cebuano, and one in Ilocano, all based on San Lorenzo arrangements. As they performed, the locals sat stunned. To hear their native languages sung by foreign lips, with care and respect, was a moment of profound connection. After the concert, the Korean conductor bowed deeply and said, "Your culture has beauty the world must hear." That exchange became a turning point. It reminded everyone that Filipino music didn't need to be globalized to be valuable. It only needed to be shared with sincerity. And the San Lorenzo Choir had taught the world how to receive it with reverence. Ma'am Selly passed away on a quiet afternoon surrounded by former students. She had lived to see everything: the cathedral, the reunions, the music halls, the honors. But in her final days, what she spoke of most was not fame, but faith. "Tell them," she whispered, "it wasn't our voices that carried us. It was our belief." Her funeral was unlike any other. Choirs from across the nation came, each singing a different Filipino hymn, creating a living tribute of layered harmony. Her casket was carried into the chapel to the sound of "O Holy Night," the same song she once made her students repeat over and over until they sang it with soul. As her final note faded into the rafters, the room sat in silence. No one clapped. They simply listened. And in that silence, her spirit remained. Years later, The San Lorenzo Cultural Center added a new wing, the Celi Santos School for Musical Heritage. It offered free training to young musicians, especially those from underprivileged backgrounds. The students didn't just learn how to sing, they learned why it mattered. They studied history, language, faith, and the role of music in protest and prayer. One wall featured a quote from Celi herself: "To sing without knowing your story is just noise. But when you sing with soul, you change the world." Her legacy wasn't cast in marble, but in the hearts of children who now stood tall on stages once too big for them. In every voice that rose from that school, hers could still be heard, gently guiding, always believing. The choir's story was eventually archived in the National Library of the Philippines, recognized as one of the most influential cultural narratives of its era. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real, raw, humble. It showed the world that greatness could rise from gravel roads and borrowed robes. That global impact didn't require polished stages, only hearts that burned with purpose. The documentary based on their journey was translated into 18 languages and shown in classrooms worldwide. But even more touching were the letters that still arrived, from inmates, from refugees, from children in war zones, saying, "Your music reminded me that I am not alone." The choir never set out to be world changers, but their truth became a torch, passed quietly from hand to hand. On the choir's 25th anniversary, the current members gathered for a special recording. They chose not a grand cathedral, nor a famous venue. Instead, they returned to the original chapel, modest, familiar, sacred. They sang a song written by Joy, now a choir leader herself, titled Balaktinig, Return of the Voice. The song was a tribute to those who had gone before, and a promise to those yet to come. It spoke of distant nights, borrowed dreams, and a voice that refused to die. The final verse was sung in unison by the old and new members together, their voices rising into one chorus. Outside, a crowd had gathered, not to cheer, but simply to listen. And as the final note faded, so did all distance between past and present. That performance, though quiet and local, became their most beloved. It wasn't shared widely. It wasn't meant to go viral. It was for them, for those who remembered the long bus rides, the taste of snow, the weight of borrowed coats, the ache of homesickness, the high of ovations, the hush of prayer. It was for those who had stood trembling before a cathedral, terrified but faithful. It was for the little ones watching from the sidelines, wondering if their voice mattered. In that small room, time stood still, and the song that began decades ago, with trembling lips and unwavering belief, sang on unshaken, unburdened, unending. In the end, the story of the San Lorenzo Youth Choir was not just about music. It was about the Filipino spirit, resilient, radiant, and ready to rise. It was about how one group of young people, armed with nothing but harmony and heart, managed to touch the world. They reminded us that you don't need fame to matter. You don't need wealth to inspire. You don't need perfection to be unforgettable. All you need is a voice, and the courage to use it with truth. They sang for God, for country, for community, and for the quiet soul in the back of the room who thought no one was listening. And they proved that yes, someone always is. So when people ask, years from now, what made the San Lorenzo Youth Choir so special, the answer will not be found in the number of views or the medals they earned. It will be found in the quiet echoes they left behind. In the way a child somewhere in Mindanao hums a carol with pride. In the way an OFW mother plays their song while folding laundry in a foreign land. In the way a former member, now a teacher, tells her students, "You are enough." Their greatness was not in their notes, but in their meaning. And in a world constantly racing to be louder, they reminded us that sometimes the softest song changes the most hearts. The San Lorenzo Youth Choir may have begun as a simple gathering of young dreamers in a small Filipino town, but they ended as something more, a living, breathing testament to the power of art rooted in truth. Their music did not just cross borders, it softened them. It did not just inspire applause, it restored faith. And in every note they sang, from snowy cathedrals to broken chapels, they carried a message that echoes still, that the Filipino voice, when raised in honesty and hope, is not just heard, it is felt. Across oceans, across generations, across time, they were a choir. They were a story. They were a light. And that light will never go out.